I see that there is a next question there.
One on behalf of Mark Taylor-Canfield, a journalist from Seattle. So, how can public funds be used to finance investigative journalism without creating conflict of interest? It's a very good question.
Yeah, very good question. So one is one of my questions that, for example, in Hungary, we have a lot of public funding for media. The question is not if the money is there, but how to make it independent and working well.
Welcome to the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield. We offer you independent voices and underreported stories about topics you won't hear anywhere else. Join us as we delve into the deeper issues behind the news stories of the day on the MTC Report.
This is Mark Taylor-Canfield, and this is the MTC Report. Today I'm talking about the election for Seattle mayor. As some of you may know, our progressive mayor, Ed Murray, used to be the head of the state senate in the state legislature in Washington State, but he was forced to pull out of the race after some alleged sex scandals, which I won't go into here. There's plenty of information about that online. But I just wanted to let you know where we're at in Seattle as far as the mayor's race. Okay, Seattle will elect a woman as their mayor for the first time since the legendary days of Bertha Knight Landis nearly a century ago. And I'm currently writing about this at the Capitol Hill Times, so you can see my article there. In 1926, Bertha became the first female mayor of any major U.S. city. And just a side issue here, the Big Dig in Seattle is also called Bertha. Famous for her courageous battles to eliminate graft and corruption, Big Bertha's main targets were outlaw bootleggers, including Seattle's chief of police. I'm not lying. So she fired him. Bertha really shook things up for a while, until the Good Old Boys Network sort of got back into the business of controlling the legal and illegal operations going on in Seattle. But while she was mayor from 1926 to 1928, it was a reform era. And her election was a major paradigm shift, and that patriarchal cabal included the Yesler and the Denny clans, as anybody who's familiar with Seattle history knows. There were very big financial empires that controlled most of the city. And the whole grid of the city is set up because of the Yesler and Denny's, because they were trying to fight over the land, so they set up grids opposite each other that don't correlate, which is why the traffic patterns in Seattle are so crazy. But anyway, by comparison, today's local wealthy elites in Seattle represent some of the richest people in the world, including Bill Gates and Paul Allen, Microsoft billionaires, and also Jeff Bezos, the Amazon empire, who, also bankrolled a lot of Uber, and, Amazon now owns Whole Foods, and Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. So another empire, financial monopoly empire in the make, just like other corporations like Microsoft and Google have done before. So this year's election for Seattle mayor drew at least 21 candidates into the ring. So everyone seemed to jump in at the last minute. Everyone, their dog, their brother, their mother, their grandma. But they all jumped in at the last minute after Ed Murray's alleged sex scandal caused him to withdraw from the race. So, and unfortunately it was like a pack of sharks, a school of sharks or whatever you call it, that smelled blood. It was terrible. Everybody jumped in the race, including former mayor Mike Makin, who lost his re-election campaign and was very unpopular for, being figuratively at least in bed with the developers in Seattle. But he tried to run again. My friend Bob Hasagawa, who has been a longtime state senator, who's been trying to introduce the idea of a state bank in Washington State for many years. He ran for mayor. So did Nikita Oliver, who is a very popular educator and poet from the area. But two candidates won the primaries, and they're both women. That's why we know there will be a woman as mayor for Seattle in 2017, and that is because former U.S. Attorney Jenny Durkan and urban planner Cary Moon won the primary races. So now they're in a runoff for the November election. And just to give you an idea of how things have been and what the political atmosphere is like in Seattle, this political free-for-all, when everybody jumped in the race, took place at a time when most Seattleites, yes, that's what you call people from Seattle, Seattleites, were leaning to the left in the face of increasing right-wing rhetoric coming from Washington, D.C. and the Trump administration. So candidate Nikita Oliver and a long list of progressives, democratic socialists, and independents focused a spotlight on some of the economic, environmental, and social inequalities that currently plague the Emerald City. Yes, it's known as the Emerald City, like the Wizard of Oz, and there are a few wizards here, including probably some of those billionaires whose names I mentioned before. But yes, the social inequities were brought up by all of these candidates, or most of them, and residents of Seattle know these issues that I'm talking about, this economic inequality, because they face them every day, including the mass homelessness and the resulting economic refugee camps. There are estimated to be 400 different homeless camps around the city. There's at least 5,000 people by the last count living on the streets in Seattle with no permanent shelter, and 10,000 in Martin Luther King Jr. County, which is the county that Seattle is located in on Puget Sound. At least 10,000 people have no permanent housing in Martin Luther King Jr. County. Yes, it's named after Martin Luther King Jr., and I am sure, I am positive, I am convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he would not be proud of the fact that in a county named after him there are 10,000 people with no homes. And this is why the mayor of Seattle, Ed Murray, and the executive of the King County Commissioners of King County, Dow Constantine, both declared civil emergencies due to mass homelessness. Why? Because companies like Amazon have bought up all the real estate. The prices are going through the roof. The rents are going through the roof. People cannot afford to live here anymore. Who have been here, 35 years. Suddenly they can't afford their rent. It's tripled. It's doubled. They can't do it. So, residents of Seattle, like I said, know these issues very well. The mass homelessness, the extreme gentrification, the racial and economic bias that goes into some of these decisions about development. The corporate greed and the political apathy amongst our own city government leaders, who have failed to act to protect the community and to protect the best interests of the community. Primary election winners Cary Moon and Jenny Durkan have continued to push to the left on most of these social and economic issues, but there is a discernible difference between the two candidates. And I noticed some of these obvious differences during their participation at KEXP's Mayoral Candidates Forum. KEXP is a very famous radio station in Seattle. It was actually started by Microsoft billionaire Paul Allen, but it is a public station, but it's very famous around the world for breaking the Seattle music scene and bands from Seattle. But they also, they have a worldwide audience, so they also sponsor shows in New York City. But anyway, KEXP held a mayoral candidates forum on September 16th, and both of these candidates, Jenny Durkan and Cary Moon, were asked to speak and also to answer some questions. So I will only tell you this: it's a rock and roll station for the most part, and there was a DJ live on the air, but they were actually broadcasting this live. But former U.S. Attorney Jenny Durkan, I have to say, she represents to me at least, to a typical neoliberal style of politics. I'm sorry. I know she says she's a progressive, and a lot of folks in the Northwest say that. But these candidates that run in this liberal style, they say that they feel empathy for you while they're basically busy trying to manipulate the electorate into letting them run the entire show. Okay? It's a sort of a corporate liberalism, and it's an old school attitude which probably works well, in the courtroom for Jenny Durkan, U.S. Attorney, and in the corporate boardroom, but perhaps not in the mayor's office, especially in a progressive city like Seattle, where political alliances are much more nuanced and subtle, and where your authority and your true power comes from your support amongst the voters and community organizations, not from the bankrolls of your very powerful and wealthy friends. So let's face it, Jenny Durkan is a member of the Seattle establishment. I mean, I applaud her outspoken opposition to some of the repressive policies promoted by the Trump regime, but she's not running a revolutionary campaign. So, okay, maybe this isn't really a very scientific analysis of Durkan's personal character, but she said at the KEXP forum that the last concert she saw in Seattle was the band The Eagles, who are not from Seattle, obviously. They're from Southern California. So apparently Jenny Durkan is the, quote, easy listening candidate for folks who are just a little bit nervous about democratic socialism and grassroots campaigns for economic justice. So they want a safe candidate, someone who's more establishment, but who they can claim as progressive. So that would be Jenny Durkan, right? But in contrast to Durkan's constrained and uptight delivery, which is the way I described it today, Cary Moon seems like someone you could invite to see a local punk band, right? At some dive club. I mean, her manner was very relaxed and casual, but she's also very passionate about some of the issues that tend to get ignored by Seattle government officials and by the local media, and by the national media and international media. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce and the Tourism Bureau aren't going to tell you about most of these social and economic problems in this beautiful city. There has always been a tendency to just sweep all of this nasty stuff under the rug and hide it from visitors to the city. So that's part of the strategy here. Don't be fooled. But we have another chance to shake up the political establishment with the election of a woman as mayor of Seattle. And I hope that voters here are willing to take a chance and, vote for a new face in city politics. Because I'm aware of Durkan's track record as far as an attorney and a public servant. But I believe that Cary Moon is much more connected to the struggles of real working class families. I mean, we need political leaders who have not lost touch with the communities that they serve. I think that's happened many times before with Democrats and Republicans and all along the political spectrum.
You want me to stay home and help with the chores? I said, well, baby, I started to get bored. She took my favorite jacket and she chased my friends away. Now I'm here alone and alone, I guess I'll say. And said, well, how'd you have to cheat me out of everything I own? You took all my records and you kicked me out of my home. Well, baby, won't you take me back? I'm not so bad. In fact, I bet you, honey, I'm the best you ever had. I may not have a nickel or a fancy degree, but when it comes to loving, hey, you get the best of me. I said, I'll finally let you go now. I think I'm moving on, but I need to get my head straight. And he said,
it's quite clear that Seattle's politics are moving farther to the left following the administration of Donald Trump. There's been a big pushback against the Trump administration's immigration policies. Seattle is considered a sanctuary state. There's always been a pretty large contingent of Greens and progressive Democrats here. A lot of Bernie-crats, so it's moving farther and farther towards a more actually democratic socialist sort of leaning, with the candidates running for mayor this time around, like Nikita Oliver, the poet and educator. It's clear that the Seattle politics are continuing to move to the left. They're not going to move to the right. This is not a Republican stronghold, and it doesn't look like it's going to become that anytime soon. This is a very progressive area of the country, and it has a tradition of being very progressive and innovative, so I doubt that that's going to change anytime soon. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield reporting from Seattle for the MTC Report.
So the next one is about music and KEXP. So music in Seattle is a big deal. If your campaign had a theme song, and maybe it already does, what would it be?
I don't know. I love Beyonce, so I gotta say Formation.
My campaign won't let me say it, but maybe Pearl Jam's The Fixer.
Can you name a few of your go-to mentors and advisors when it comes to issues of the environment and the arts, and who in your advisory group is under 18? Jenny goes first.
Okay, under 18 are my children who think I'm completely irrelevant. At least one of them's under 18, one's 20. A number of advisors, some of them who are in this room, I'm afraid to call them out by name. Do I have to single them out? I'll call them out? Okay, we've got Thatcher Bailey over there. Where did he disappear to? I've got, now everyone's ducking. That's so unfair. I won't name them all. But Dennis also, go ahead.
Okay, advisors, I think we have a lot of volunteers on our campaign under 18, which feels fabulous, so I always listen to them when they come in to volunteer. And of course my daughter, Russia, who's 18, high school student, super radical. And advisors on the environment, I would say all the good folks at Climate Solutions, at Got Green, at SAGE, and at Sierra Club. I'm tapped into all of them and take their advice frequently.
So we're back to round two. So we're back to the 90-second questions. And this one, Cary, we're going to start with you. Much of the city's public green spaces, as well as important arts and cultural facilities, are in single-family neighborhoods. As mayor, how would you go about ensuring equitable access to these existing parks and places and to new green spaces?
So I think, there's a phrase we're all familiar with, transit-oriented development. I also think we need to look at park-oriented development and look at densifying the city by access to parks and transit both, because we all know that as we densify, having access to open space is essential. I live with my family of 4 in 1,200 square feet, which is a fairly small condo, and we spend a lot of our time outside. We don't have a yard. We spend our time in parks. And I think it's essential for dense urban living to have access to parks. I would make sure that we're looking at density around parks and transit, and also look at making sure all parks feel welcoming and open to everybody. I think, and having transit access to parks, I think Discovery Park is a fascinating challenge. It is one of the most wild, beautiful natural places in this city where you can really get to the water and be connected to Elliott Bay and the Salish Sea. It's really hard to get there on transit, and we absolutely have to make sure we have transit access to parks too, as well as density near parks.
So assuring that access for everybody is critical to what will make us as a society going forward and a city going forward, really that city where we're more uniform, more diverse, and more brought together.
Yes, Cary Moon is sort of the darling of The Stranger, which is our sort of underground alternative newspaper in Seattle. She's an urban planner, and she's going up against Jenny Durkan, who's a former U.S. attorney, so a very well-established family with political connections in the community. And some would say, part of the established power structure and perhaps neoliberal. So that was my impression anyway of this debate. I'll let you decide for yourself.
No paddles or cards. You can raise them at the same time. We have 3 questions. Did you support Proposition 1, access for all, on the August ballot?
The next one takes us back to 2011. Did you support replacing the Alaska Way Viaduct with the deep bore tunnel?
And back to 1995, when Seattle voted on whether or not to create the 60-acre park known as the Seattle Commons in South Lake Union. Did you or would you have supported the proposal?
I want to explain.
Do you want to use that challenge? We could do that challenge.
You can use your challenge.
I was really concerned that the quality of the development was very suburban in its focus, and it didn't have the right kind of jobs and housing balance. It didn't have enough affordable housing. It didn't do enough to preserve the historic character of South Lake Union. While I was 100% in favor of having a park, the specific proposal had some serious flaws that, as an urban designer, landscape planner, and was really concerned about what kind of place it was going to make. It looked too much like Bellevue was going to come downtown. We needed the park, but not with everything else that was attached to it.
Are you challenging? This is your second challenge. Okay, so you're going to save about 60 seconds for later on. Okay, thank you. All right.
With that, we're going to turn to our next kind of activity in this forum, which is each candidate has prepared questions to ask one another on topics of arts and environment. So they did a coin flip prior to this, and the first question will be asked from Jenny to Cary. So the floor is yours.
So one of the topics we've been talking about is access to parks and how vital they are for everyone in our community. And it's a two-part question, if that's fair. But there was a proposal by Mike O'Brien that would have opened up our parks and other places in our city for people who were homeless to have encampments. And you have said that you do not favor moving people, relocating people out of unsanctioned encampments. My question is at what point do encampments in parks like Ravenna or on playfields and other parks that people are trying to join get too big before you take action? And did you support Mike O'Brien's ordinance that would have allowed people to camp anywhere?
So I take exception with that characterization of Mike O'Brien's ordinance, but I will go to the second part first. I believe we spent $700,000 last year chasing people from one unsanctioned encampment to another without offering them a place to come inside. That is not morally right. It's not just. It's deeply disruptive for the folks who we're chasing around. It throws their lives further into chaos. We absolutely have to invest all our resources in low-barrier shelters, tiny house villages, sanctioned encampments where folks have access to services like Licton Springs or the many tiny house villages we've seen. Invite folks to come inside and then go in after to clean up after the mess that they've left behind because they didn't have access to sanitation or garbage services. So we have to focus all our resources in creating places for them to come inside. Chasing them around doesn't work. There are 400 unsanctioned encampments in the city. We cannot keep pushing them from one to another. We have got to bring folks inside. So I would focus all my resources on creating those kind of low barrier shelters, opening up community centers where needed, looking at how do we make the shelters we have now 24-hour, because people need a place to come inside where they can bring their pets, they can bring their partners, they have a place to store their stuff. It's simply unrealistic to push them from one place to another without inviting them to come in.
Would you like to use your challenge?
No, I think in fairness she'd answer the question, which is, will she let them stay in the parks?
We're going to let you do the same, Cary, to Jenny if she feels that you haven't answered her question. But we're going to give you 30 seconds. We're going to test our timekeepers. We're going to give you 30 seconds to answer Jenny's question.
So people who are not doing any harm to their communities and their neighbors, who are not breaking any laws except for being homeless and being poor, yes, I would allow them to stay where they are until we have a place to offer them, and then go to them with social services, with the harm reduction public health approach and say, we have a spot for you, what do you need to come inside, how can we help you come inside? But until we have that, I'm not going to push people around.
So with that, you now have an opportunity to ask your first question of Jenny.
So how can we trust that you understand music, creative culture, the public realm, and production of art as the soul of Seattle from the narrow point of view of a corporate lawyer and a prosecutor?
If that were true, you might want to worry. But I am so much bigger than any of that. I was just saying when I walked in here today, one reason I loved KXAP was that when I was in college, I was a radio disc jockey and got to do the classical music show, and I was Jenny Durkan, bocking you from the tower. It was great, and all my whole life, music and parks have meant so much to me. I grew up in this town, in and around, and have seen the changes that have really challenged our soul. And so when I decided to run for mayor, I did it because of my kids, really. And I thought about what's the world that I'm going to be leaving them. My son said to me when we were debating the election at a family event once, I said to him, what do you think? And he said, Mom, I think things are really messed up. And I'm not sure they're going to get better till your generation dies. And he wasn't being mean, and he wasn't being funny, and that's what motivated me to run, because you know what? With what's happening in Washington, It's going to be up to each one of us, everyone in this room, to step in ways that are harder than we would think. And so I've tried to run a campaign that would bring everybody together, not rely on division. So yes, I've got business support, but I've also got support of nurses and firefighters and iron workers and people who work for a living every day as service employees. That's what I'll be as mayor, because I want to serve all this city and build that city in the future that my kids can love as much as I've loved this city growing up.
If you would like it, you're entitled to... Nope, you're okay. So now we're going to return to the questions that we have been going through previously. Candidates have 90 seconds each to reply to these.
Because you don't want my loving anymore. I said you sold me down the river. It's a fast road to the shore. I said you sold me down the river. You don't want me anymore. Oh well, you sold me down the river because you do not want my loving anymore. Give you all my money, but you still wanted more. I said I love you, honey. You just wanted to the door. You wanted me to stay home and help you with the chores. And I said, baby, I think I'm getting bored. You took my favorite jacket, then you chased my friends away. And now I'm here all alone, and alone I guess I'll stay while and you kicked me out my home. So way down, so way down.
Cultural experience. But I would say one of the Women's March the day after the election, where so many people gathered and were resisting, but yet it was peaceful and motivated.
So this one gets...
Cary
She got her mind blown too.
For me, it was the local production of the locally written opera Amelia a few years ago, because that was the first time I was hit full force with music, visual, lighting, acting, costume. All of it together is practically overwhelming. It was a brilliant show.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
Another election, another convention, another media intervention. Another reason, another season to vote for Bernie.
It's not one thing. This is a pattern of divisiveness, of a very dark and in many ways dangerous vision of our country, where he incites violence.
I have talked to doctors who have told me that people walk in the door extremely sick. And doctors say, why didn't you come in here 6 months ago when you first felt your symptoms? And people said, I had no health insurance, or I had a high
This is the MTC Report, the news behind the news, with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield.
We can have a world-class healthcare system without waiting lines.
Donald is pushed on something which is obviously uncomfortable, like what these women are saying, he immediately goes to denying responsibility. And it's not just about women. He never apologizes or says he's sorry for anything.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
go. My point is, Chuck, there's massive rationing in America. It is rationing based on money. If you don't have money,
spin, it's a lot of hype. And Hillary's nervous. She answers twice. It's really thrilling that they're so willing to vote for Bernie. Yeah, Bernie Sanders guy. On one side it votes for Bernie, but the leaders, they want Hillary. He's doing phone banks, he's taking polls, and every day his campaign grows. And don't forget, folks, that's what you get, folks. We're voting for Bernie, that Bernie Sanders guy. It's one big mess, the party's splitting. And can't you guess, he feels neglected, and she's suspected of sleeping with Wall Street.
Where he incites violence, where he applauds people who are pushing and pulling and punching at his rallies. That is not who America is.
I have talked to doctors who have told me that people walk in the door extremely sick. And doctors say, why didn't you come in here 6 months ago when you first felt your symptoms? And people said, I had no health insurance, or I had a high
This is the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield.
We can have a world-class healthcare system without waiting lines, spending the same amount.
This is the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield.
I've been criticized saying that, let me say it again. I believe health is a right of all people. I will fight for a Medicare for all single-payer system. Second of all right? You want to talk about rationing? You got 29 million people in this country who have no health insurance. How's that for rationing? They can't go to the doctor.
Now here's a place you always need a lot of friends.
Well, I think it's so good that there are so many ideas, for example, for how to increase funding for investigative journalism. I know that, for example, the EBU now has proposed together with the EFJ a kind of also a pilot scheme to support quality journalism for mobile phones and stuff. And I think it's excellent. But all the time when you set up a scheme like that, you have to have in mind these kind of independence aspect, you know. And we have seen recent examples from Norway where the Social Democrats now, a couple of weeks ago, tried to stop a big investigative story about the prime ministerial candidate from that party. We have seen Finnish politicians, the prime minister, meddling in the kind of their editorial decisions. And we have seen in Denmark how the funding of the Danish radio has also been slashed in a way, you know.